different program? Did you apply because you want to continue in academia? It doesn't really matter what your answer is to me. I would just recommend that you have an answer and that you can constantly iterate on this. You don't have to be stuck in whatever you chose at the beginning, but you know why you're there and why you continue to be there. And if those questions that you're answering, so why you're in grad school, why did you choose your supervisor, which we'll talk about later, why are you doing the project that you're doing? Are you actually interested in doing this project and your day-to-day stuff? If these answers change during your degree or even during your application process, and what you are doing is no longer contributing to those end goals, so why you are doing things, and you realize you aren't doing the things that you should be doing, then you can take steps to change that. So you can make a change to what you're doing so that your actions align with your goals. So a couple things that I wanted to talk about was, if you know why you're doing things, you can keep yourself focused on the things that actually matter. So you can do the experiments that you need to be doing, you can do the extracurriculars that you need to be doing, which we'll also talk about later. But it will also help you prevent the burnout that is very common with graduate school. So you're going to be working a lot, probably, maybe more than you should be working, but if you know why you're doing these things, you can maybe keep yourself grounded into what's important and be more okay with doing this work. And don't feel like you're stuck with anything that you have. So just because you're doing something doesn't mean you always have to be doing that. If your project is not interesting to you and you're not doing things that you want to be doing, maybe have a talk with your supervisor and try to pivot into something that would interest you, because if you're not interested in it, you're probably not going to be as productive as you could be, and you're not going to be making substantial progress to publish that paper that you need or to finish your class for that degree. But if you have, I'm going to say this a lot, and I'm very hypocritical about this because I don't know the answers to all of these myself. I'm still working on these, but just knowing why you are there. Some examples would be, if you know that you're going to be transferring into industry, potentially at the end of your degree, you can look for opportunities that would boost your CV, but not just boosting your CV generally. Don't just take anything that will fit there. You can take specific opportunities that will look good to an industry application. And then also you can say no to things that won't help you. So if you have an extracurricular that pops up or a volunteer experience, but you know that nobody's ever going to look at that on your CV and it won't help, then you can dedicate your time to something that actually will help you in the future. And that's not to say you should just ignore all those extracurriculars that don't fit perfectly in what you want to be doing at the end, because some of these have hidden benefits that you won't know until you actually do it. But you can use this as a sort of guideline to point you in the right direction and to keep you moving forward, not just aimlessly wandering through your degree. Because if you're aimlessly wandering, it will likely take more time than you will want it to. And if you can stay focused, you can get to that end goal, the end goal that you want, and you can get there quicker and more painlessly. And that is mostly what I have. It's quite simple. It's kind of philosophical, so I don't have that many specifics, but it's, I believe, a good philosophy to keep in the back of your mind and to have it guide you through your studies from start to finish. And that's all I have. So if you want to ask questions about that, I'd be happy to talk about it later.
Great, thank you, Timo. And next we'll have Jacqueline start.
So just a quick about me bit. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. I received my Bachelor of Science in Biology and a minor in French from Whitworth University, which is located in Spokane, Washington. So during my undergrad, I pursued quite a few different research opportunities. I worked for a year in a molecular genetics lab and decided that I absolutely hated that. I didn't like the work that I was doing. I didn't like necessarily the science behind that or the opportunities that were available. And so I went and pursued more in the realm of neuroscience, which is what I was interested in. And my university did not have anything beyond just a general biology degree. So I had to work pretty hard for that. So I worked for 2 years in a neurobehavioral and drug development lab. And then much like what our summer students now are doing, I did an intensive summer research position in New York in a lab that was looking at gliobiology and MS pathology. And of note, in that neurobehavior and drug development lab, I worked in the lab for a year and ran the lab for a year. So pursuing the variety of opportunities that I did in my undergrad, it was a lot of hard work, but it did set me up very well for my PhD in working in a variety of labs and also having a bit of leadership and mentorship experience in running a lab. Immediately after I finished my undergrad, I started my PhD at the University of Calgary, and now I'm beginning my 3rd year as a senior student in the Kuipers lab. So the Kuipers lab is a very young lab. I was their first graduate student, and so that had a lot of pros and cons. Pros in that I got to be really instrumental in setting up the lab and seeing everything from the start. I have a lot of leadership and mentorship opportunities that are unique because I am the senior student. But it also means that there's a lot of independence required and a lot of initiative instead of being in a little bit more of an established lab. One thing to note is that I did change labs in my PhD thesis 9 months after starting my PhD. This was a significant decision one I did not take lightly. I was lucky to have the support of my program director, Dr. Jeff Dunn. I would not recommend doing this unless you have a very significant reason. But it is completely possible, and there are people that will support you. And lastly, I have a cat named Freya. She's behind me. She's almost 2.5, and she really likes blankets, and that's her picture. So I'm talking to you guys about choosing a supervisor and a lab. So most of what I am talking about comes from this article from Ben Barris, who's one of my scientific heroes. If you'd like to email me, our emails are the last slide of this presentation, and I'd happily send you this paper. Pick someone that's actively publishing papers. This shows that there's active work coming out of their lab. So if they haven't published in a while, maybe they're looking at retiring, or there's something going on in their lab. So you want a lab that's actively working on publishing papers so that you're going to be able to get out in a timely manner. Mentorship and leadership experience is important. There are classes and seminars that are advertised specifically to PIs. As a postdoc, you don't necessarily get training for how to be a PI unless you go out and search for that. And so you can ask your potential supervisor if they've recently attended any such seminars and maybe what they learned from that, how they implement those things in their lab. That'll give you an idea of how important mentorship and leadership is to them, because that's a huge part of their job. Decide if what you need is independence, hand-holding, or a combination of both. Now, all these words have various connotations. They don't necessarily mean them in that sense. But if you are more of a student that works well, if your supervisor just leaves you be and you figure stuff out on your own, then you might want a more independent lab experience. So this might be someone who's a clinician where they do have to spend hours in the clinic. So they might still be very involved and in your day-to-day work, but more often than not, they're going to have that time in the clinic where you're not going to be able to get their help. You might want a lab that's a little bit more of a hand-holding lab where the PI just has their job as the PI and they can be involved and helping and physically in the lab space very often, or you might want some sort of combination. For example, for me, when I first started my PhD, I knew I wanted more of a hand-holding type lab because I had worked only in neuroscience labs to just get that experience, but I had no actual neuroscience background. And so I knew I would want something a little bit more supportive in that respect. Lab websites are a wealth of information. So these websites often have pictures. Those pictures are what you can use to see if the lab gets along, if they do stuff outside of the lab, if the environment seems like a good thing. It also can tell you some of what they're researching, but I wouldn't go to the lab websites to find their most recently published papers because often those are not updated. Do not pick your PI based off of their gender. So I was a victim of this. Up until my PhD, I had only had male supervisors, and I very conscientiously wanted a female supervisor when I started. I do think that limited me to some degree. There is a disparity in terms of PIs and gender. There are fewer female PIs than male, still in STEM. And so to some degree, that limited me in wanting to support and have a female PI. Members of the lab are a great litmus test. Ask them your honest questions. If you can do so outside of the lab environment, that's the best. I was very lucky when I first interviewed at U of C, and my lab mates took me out to Banff, and that was a very long and awkward drive where I could ask them as many questions as I wanted. So ask them things that might be a little taboo. Ask them how the PI reacts when an experiment fails, if they're helpful in troubleshooting, if the lab environment is good, how often they work overtime, things that you would only get as insider information. They usually are happy to share with you. Okay, and now finally I've just got some top tips. For the love of God, write everything down. Keep your lab book organized with a table of contents. This will save you later. Sometimes it can even impress your PI. I've had it where my PI has gone into my lab book to look for something, and because it was organized with a table of contents, it was easy to find it, and I won brownie points. Mental health days are important and should be taken when necessary. We don't look at this enough, but grad school is exhausting, and like Timo talked about, you can be burnt out, and sometimes you just need to take a day, if it's possible with your experiments, to not think about science, and that's okay. Collaboration and asking for help from older students and postdocs. These people are a fantastic resource for troubleshooting. The amount of times I have gone into our neighboring lab where there's a lot of postdocs and just asked for help for a technique or for a reagent, and they've been there, has been phenomenal. I would highly recommend reaching out. Pursue seminars and lectures of interest, volunteer, and representation opportunities. So I know for me, I don't want to go into academia when I'm done. I'd rather be in scientific communication. So pursuing an opportunity like speaking to you guys today is something that I do regularly in order to both build up my CV like Timo talked about, and also to give me experience. In Canada, I would recommend you start as a master's student and then transition to a PhD if that is your goal. It is cheaper, and it also gives you an out if you decide that lab environment's not for you. I started straight as a PhD, which is more common in the States, and that was the path that I was familiar with. But if I could go back, I would start as a master's student, both to save money, and because finishing out a master's, if that lab environment isn't for you, is a lot easier than transitioning labs when you're in a PhD. And finally, imposter syndrome is real and it affects many of us. You are not alone and you have earned your spot. My best advice is to very humbly fake it until you make it. Sometimes you just have to tell yourself you're a badass and move on. And that is all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. We will now hear from Emily.
Hi guys. I'll just start by talking about me a little bit first. So I'm not from here. I grew up in Barrie, Ontario. That's where my family and most of my friends are. I graduated with a Bachelor of Medical Sciences from Western University in London. That was last spring. And my journey was probably a bit different than most grad students because I didn't do an undergrad thesis. So I actually, my master's is my first research experience. And it's possible, and it's difficult, but it's definitely possible to do. And I decided that I wanted to do research, and so I did it. And so last summer I moved to Calgary. I wanted to be close to the mountains, and I did a lot of research in picking a supervisor, and I ended up in the Young Lab where I'm studying inhibition of remyelination in multiple sclerosis. And yeah, so I started that last summer. I'm new to the lab. I've been here for a year, and I spend all of my free time in the mountains, rock climbing and hiking and backcountry skiing and things like that. So that's a bit about me. I can't change the, Jacqueline, can you change the slide? Thank you. So I'm just gonna talk to you guys a little bit about some advice that I can offer. And this is also, I'm kind of preaching to myself too. These are things that I'm trying to remember all the time in the lab. So firstly, it's important to not be afraid to ask for help. You're gonna feel like a bit of a nuisance when you're starting out in the lab, or I definitely did, because you're constantly, you're learning so many new things at once and constantly asking for help. But those postdocs in your lab, they've been through it. They're great resources, like Jacqueline said. They have such a wealth of knowledge, and it's important to take advantage of that while you're in that environment. And same thing with your supervisor. I was really intimidated by my supervisor at first. If you know Wee Young, he's a very smart man and a very professional supervisor, and it's easy to be intimidated by him. But it's important to remember that your supervisor was a grad student at one point as well. They've been in your shoes, they know what you're going through, and they're going to be a great resource for you throughout your graduate studies. So definitely use the resources you have. And at the same time, it's important to remember that you made it here on your own. You're smart and you're capable of critical thinking and problem solving. And it's important to remember that you can solve things on your own too. And you're smart enough to be here, and you can get through those problems and challenges on your own as well. A big thing that I was told at the beginning and that I did, and I really, really am thankful that I did, is keeping detailed notes and references from the start. So at the beginning of your graduate studies, you're going to be doing less hands-on wet lab things and a lot more reading, catching up on the literature, things like that. And so make notes and keep track of where you're getting all of that information. Keep track of your references, whatever way you choose to do that. My supervisor really likes PowerPoint, so I made all my notes in PowerPoint and I kept track of all my references. And now that I'm writing my thesis proposal and I'm going to be eventually writing my thesis, it's really, really nice to have all of that there and organized for me to look back on. So definitely do that if you can. And then I want to talk a lot about the importance of work-life balance. I think this is really important because burnout does happen, and it's important to make time for the things you're passionate about. So, and that can be hard too, because grad school, you're not working 9 to 5, like you are working 9 to 5, but you're also working above and beyond that on the evenings and on the weekends, and whenever your cells or your mice or whatever you're dealing with, whenever they need you, you're there. So like, for example, I did a lot of cell culture work in the winter, but I really liked ski touring. So my weekends were for ski touring whenever I possibly could. But I would have to come in and change my cells media and things like that. And if that fell on a Saturday, that would absolutely wreck my ski touring day. And I need that outlet. That's my break and my mental shutdown. So I would come in first thing in the morning, change my cells media, and then head out to the mountains. And so you just make time for the things that you love. I think that's super, super important. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. My email is going to be at the end of the PowerPoint. So if anyone has any questions for me, to reach out. Yeah, I did start here fresh from Ontario. So I did the whole move and discover a new city and new place entirely. So yeah, if anyone needs anything, just don't be afraid to reach out. Thanks.
Thank you, Emily. All right, now we'll hear from Zachary.
Hey everyone, thank you, Trisha. Yeah, so I'm Zach, and I'm a grad student at U of C, and I'll be talking to you a little bit today, I guess, about sort of grad school outside of the lab and the different opportunities that you can get, and sort of, I guess, how to get there. I'll start with a brief introduction of myself. I grew up in Central Alberta, and in Central Alberta, there's not really much exposure to research or academia or anything like that. So my first real introduction to research was actually kind of when I started my first research project in my undergrad. And I guess I kind of quickly started to enjoy the process, and I like the kind of systematic way of answering questions and problem solving. And so I knew after my undergrad that I wanted to continue into research and continue to do research, but I had kind of an underlying interest in neuroscience and MS specifically, despite having no training or background in either of them. So I went around to a few different labs and tried to find some projects that really interested me. And I was fortunate enough to meet with Dr. Usman, and she had this perfect project that was really exactly what I was looking for. It was kind of a great combination of some of the wet lab and basic science stuff that I had done in my undergrad, and then with kind of a combination of the clinical MS stuff that I was getting really interested in. So that's kind of, I think, the first step to everything really is finding a specific project that really interests you, something that's kind of going to keep you motivated in the background. because I guess if you settle and kind of select or take on a project that you're not really interested in, you're. Oh, my mic just shut off. One sec, sorry guys.
You're good. We can hear you.
Okay. If you settle for a project that you're not really interested in, it's going to be hard to find the same kind of motivation. So you can move this slide, I think, Jacqueline. Thank you. So I guess if you guys take nothing else from this little spiel here today, what I want you to know is that you do have time for things outside of your project in grad school. I know that there's kind of a lot of horror stories that you hear about grad students being super busy and never sleeping and always running around. And while that is certainly true sometimes, and there are weeks like that, it's not like that all the time. You know, it's a pretty sort of normal workload for the most part. I mean, there are some crazy days, but for the most part, it's kind of a pretty normal workload, especially if you did a lot of stuff in your undergrad. But again, the first step to sort of making time for yourself is actually being really invested in your research. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, I guess, but the more invested you are in the lab and in what you're doing, sort of the more efficiently you're going to work on those things, and the easier you're going to find getting stuff done, and the easier you're going to find coming in every day, and you'll be more excited to try new experiments or try new things in your project. And with that, it's going to open up kind of, I think, more time than you'll think that you'd have in grad school. And there's a lot of things that you can do with this time. Obviously, you should hang out with your friends and you should do the things that you really enjoy. But certainly, if you're looking to apply to sort of any post-grad professional schools like medical or dental school or anything like that, or really any post-grad applications with jobs and things like that, you need some semblance of sort of volunteerism and extracurricular activity. It's kind of something that's required in basically anything that you want to do. And I think that actually you get more and more applicable opportunities in grad school than you would in your undergrad, or at least I think that was the case for me. And I suppose there's a few different reasons for this. One of them is obviously that there's a heavier class load in undergrad, so you're kind of have a more rigid schedule, whereas in grad school your schedule is a little bit more flexible, and you can, like Emily was talking about, make time for the things that you want to do based on sort of the time of day that you can do them, whereas in undergrad you kind of have the rigid class schedule. And then the other reason why you have sort of more opportunities to do things outside of the lab in grad school is that undergrad is kind of a crazy situation where you've got so many different people and then so much going on that it's a good thing that you've got sort of all this introduction to different things, but it's difficult to find specific opportunities that really interest you and specific things that are really exactly what you're looking for. Whereas in grad school, you're surrounded by kind of very like-minded people and people that are interested in doing the same things and kind of just more similar to what you're looking for. And so it's an easier place to find opportunities that really interest you and things that kind of will not only look good on your CV, like we've been talking about, but will also sort of enrich your entire experience, I think. And so I guess the first step to that is to, I guess, as cheesy as it sounds, is to step outside of your comfort zone and talk to new people. This is a thing that I think a lot of people have a difficult time with, especially if you're moving to a new city or going to a new school in the beginning. But everyone around you is similar to you, and they want to talk, and they're all doing all of these cool things outside of the lab. And you should honestly just talk to them. I guess a specific experience or a specific example for myself is that I've always been interested in sort of education and communicating research and both to your peers and the public. And so early in last fall, I suppose, I stepped outside of my comfort zone and I talked to the people around me, and I found out that the HBI trainee organization has an education committee. So I sent a few emails and kind of got involved with that. And really, all it takes is just sending a few emails. It's not the most difficult thing. But I sent a few emails and got involved with that committee, and it's been kind of like a pretty incredible experience, I think. And well, it's certainly added a little bit more to my plate, and grad students are already busy, and so it's hard to take on things. I think that if you find experiences and things that are genuinely interesting to you, then you'll make time for them, and you'll expand your schedule, and you'll find that doing these things is a lot more sort of enriching to your whole grad school experience than if you were to just kind of go from work to home and work to home. So it's certainly worth talking to new people and finding opportunities that interest you. And I think it's easier to do in grad school than it is in undergrad. And the point here is that these don't have to be necessarily related to your school or project, although the example I gave was related to my program. You can do stuff that's just of interest to you. So I have a friend that's really into sort of photography and graphic design and stuff like that. And in a lot of her spare time, she's doing all kinds of projects and volunteer work with film and photography and design. And I know that she's way more busy than I am, but she makes time for all of it. And things like that, those kind of extracurricular activities also look good on a CV. You don't have to be worried about things that specifically are related to research or academia, because like Timo was mentioning, the things that genuinely interest you are typically the things that you'll talk best about in an interview situation or anything like that. So don't worry about the extracurriculars being sort of specific to research or your project or anything like that. The last little point here, I suppose, is that you still do have to balance your time. You're still a grad student and you still are busy, so you can't say yes to everything, and you have to learn how to say no. And I think that that's something that gets a little bit easier as you move through, and you get better at sort of balancing and figuring out what's worth your time and what you can say no to. But yeah, you can certainly, I guess the main takeaway again is just that don't be afraid of going into grad school thinking that you're not going to have time to do any things that you had already taken on or do things that you want to do. You certainly will. I think you'll have maybe a little bit more time than you might think. And you'll be able to have all kinds of different opportunities that you would never get in undergrad. So I think that's the end of my a little speech here. And I think we've got a question period now, right?
Yes, thank you very much, Zachary. That was wonderful, everyone. We are open for questions. So if anybody has any questions, you can put them into the chat box. And hopefully, and Jacqueline will moderate the questions section. So go ahead, Jacqueline.
Cool. So our first question is from Marina. Before entering grad school, did any of you have any doubts or were debating on what to do next after your undergrad degree? How did you finally decide? Zach, you're smiling. You want to take that?
I had a ton of doubts. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And to be honest, I didn't even apply to grad school until like the deadline. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, and how I kind of finally decided, I guess, is that I took a class in my fourth year that was kind of a seminar class where you had to present on certain papers, and there was a paper that I had to present on that was an MS paper, and it was just super interesting. And then, like I kind of mentioned in my little talk there, I was always interested in the sort of research process, doing the research itself and answering questions like that. But my research in undergrad, it was kind of in like a molecular biology lab, and I wasn't really that interested in the research itself. So I guess how I finally decided what to do was that I had found this topic, MS, that I was really interested in. And I had always had this underlying interest in the research process itself. So the next step is really to look around and see what projects and what labs are doing around you, and just try to find a project that really interests you. And I guess if I didn't find a project that really interested me, I don't know what exactly I would have done. But if you look hard enough, I think you'll probably find something.
Cool. Does anyone else have any other questions you want to post in the chat? There's nothing off limits. We all can be very honest here. Okay. Did you imagine yourself being in grad school back when you were in high school? So I'll answer this one. Yes. Ever since I was very, very young, I knew that I wanted to get a PhD regardless of what it was in. In high school, I was very much an English and grammar nerd, and that's what I thought I was going to go do is linguistics. And I ended up taking more of a STEM route and always knew I wanted a PhD. So that's why I went straight to a PhD as well, instead of just doing a master's degree in land transitioning. But like I said, much cheaper in Canada. In the States, that's different. In the States, different story. But yeah, the answer is yes. Timo.
The other half of that. So in high school especially, I had absolutely zero idea about grad school. I'm not even sure I understood it. I always thought I was going to go into medicine, like a lot of bio people. They think they're going to go pre-med and then medicine. But yeah, graduate school was not on my radar at all. I started in an undergrad in neuroscience just because I had always had an interest in neuroscience. And then I did my undergrad research project, and that's where I really fell in love with just the process. And that translated into going into grad school after my undergrad. So I had no idea, and it kind of just happened, and I'm thankful that it did.
So our next question is, what are each of you hoping to do after grad school? Zach, you want to start?
I think, like Timo just mentioned, is that after or throughout my undergrad, I really thought that I was going to go into medicine. And then I decided, I guess, to go into grad school because I was enjoying the research and I wanted to continue that. But and then I didn't think I was going to go into medicine. And now I've had a resurgence where I would like to go to medicine after grad school. But I don't think that you have to feel like there's a rush to do that if that's what you want to do. For me personally, I was enjoying research and I had this opportunity to do this project. And so you can kind of just take things, and there's no rush to get into whatever you want to do. Eventually, you have a long life and there's a lot of things you can do. So you don't have to rush there.
Timo?
So I actually debated between a neuroscience grad degree and a computer science grad degree. So I took the route of I'm going to do the neuroscience part first and then try to blend in computer science later, with the idea of going into machine learning, artificial neurons, that type of stuff. So hopefully a postdoc experience in a lab that's more situated at like neurorobotics or something like that.
Cool. Emily?
Yeah, I was a bit all over the place myself. I didn't know that I wanted to do research until fourth year. Kind of like Zach said, I found myself in like a seminar course. It was a neuroscience seminar course, and then I explored the research side of science more in my fourth year and decided I wanted to do my master's at that point. Before that, I was thinking med, and then I decided I wanted to do research, and I didn't know if I would like it, and I didn't know how it would go for me. And I'm kind of like Zach, I'm kind of resurfacing my medicine idea at the moment, again, in no rush at all because we've got lots of time. But yeah, at the moment I'm thinking medical school for myself.
And then for me, I kind of talked about this a bit, but I had always, even when I started graduate school, thought I was going to stay in academia. I wanted to teach. And since I have pursued many volunteer and speaking opportunities and scientific communication opportunities, and like I said, I really, really love linguistics, like a true science nerd, definitely nerdy. So I want to work in scientific communication and something where I can combine my love of language and with science. What is the best way to find out about volunteer opportunities? So Emily, I know you volunteer with the MS Society a lot too, so do you want to take that one?
That one, we get emails from the MS Society because our lab is involved with the MS Society. So that was an easy one for me. I just reached out and asked because I thought it would be more meaningful for me. And I don't I wanted to research MS because I was interested in neuroinflammation, and it kind of just led into me looking at MS, but I don't have a super meaningful reason why I'm looking at MS. So I thought it would be good for my research, good for my motivation and intentions to get more involved with the MS community and understand it better. And so that's why I decided to reach out to the MS Society and found out they have a whole website full of volunteer opportunities. So, and Jacqueline does this as well. I do a friendly visiting volunteer work where we go in and visit people with MS. And that's been a super cool experience for me. And I would definitely, I mean, you don't have to volunteer with your research at all, but it just gave me a lot of motivation for my research and what I'm doing.
Cool. And then one thing that just got brought up by someone in the chat, Twitter is also a very useful place for scientific guidance and information and connection. So if you're looking for that for volunteerism, if you're looking for that for advice, people use that quite a bit. Let's see, how is your work?
Just,
go ahead.
Jackie, sorry, hello?
Yeah.
It's Trisha. I just also want to say that if you are part of the Alberta MS community, I know that we often have volunteer opportunities that come up for research engagement and other things that happen to come up in the community. And I try my best to get it out to everybody within the Alberta research community. And if that's something that people are interested in, the more that I know that you guys want to do, the better I would be at providing those opportunities for you guys as well. So your community itself within whatever research program you're at often has somebody who knows about the research or volunteer opportunities out there. So if you can find that somebody, they're a really good resource. Yeah.
Let's see, how is your workload now comparable to your undergrad or previous degree? Does anyone want to take this in particular?
I guess I did quite a few research projects in my undergrad. So in my second year, I did like one of those independent study courses. And in my third year, I did the same thing. And then in my fourth year, I did a thesis. And throughout your undergrad, you're kind of tasked with, if you're doing research, you have to balance like 4 or 5 classes and do your research at the same time. And I found this to be, I think the workload itself is a little bit more now, but you're better able to balance the workload because you have a more flexible schedule. So it doesn't feel nearly as busy as you did because you don't have to run back and forth from campuses and go to different classes, park your car and stuff like that. You can kind of just make a more flexible schedule that works for you. So, well, the workload for me anyway might be slightly more than my undergrad. It feels, I don't know, more relaxed, I think, or at least more enjoyable. And that could also be because I enjoy my research, but yeah.
Yeah, Emily?
I was just going to add on to, it's a bit different in the sense that, like, in my undergrad, it was meeting deadlines all the time, and it was less of me being motivated to do my own work rather than me being motivated to meet deadlines and do things on somebody else's schedule. Whereas now it's very much, you're kind of like, you decide when you do your work a lot of the time and how quickly you get through your graduate degree, I guess, depending on how hard you work and the hours you put in and stuff like that. So the amount of workload also depends a lot on you and your graduate degree.
I'd also add in that I like to think of me in grad school, it's my job. So that helps me kind of delineate, is that in undergrad, I was an undergrad. In grad school, because you only take a few classes, so they're usually done by your first or second year. And so after that, you're just in the lab as much as you can be. I mean, COVID is a whole other beast, but I usually help it helps me to think of it like this is my job, my PI is my boss, even though they're not your boss, the university is your boss. And that sort of helps. Let's see. Why did you decide to go to grad school at your respective schools, U of C and U of A? Timo, do you want to talk about U of A?
Sure. So I did my undergrad at U of A, like I said, and we do have a very good neuroscience program. Of course, Calgary has a good neuroscience program too, so not to toot my own horn. But so I knew my supervisor during undergrad, which made it very easy to transition. So when I was offered that opportunity to work in Brad's lab, I thought it was just a great fit for the project, and the U of A part kind of was secondary. I would actually very much like to get out of Alberta because I've been here all my life and I just need to go somewhere else. But U of A is a very good place to do neuroscience, and it was more the lab environment that drew me in, not the school itself.
And then would one of you guys like to take the U of C? I mean, you both could answer it because Zach, you're from Alberta, and Emily, you're not.
I think Emily should, because mine was more convenient.
Mine was a bit different too. I decided that I wanted to move to Calgary at the same time as deciding that I wanted to do a master's. So it just kind of fell together that way. And I knew I wanted to look at white matter inflammation. So I started looking at labs and found my lab that way. But mine was just the drive to move to Calgary, I think, more than anything.
And then mine, as moving abroad, I wanted to have, so my undergrad, I moved to a different state when I had no family, no friends, but my undergrad was a very close-knit community, so you had that support. But grad school, I wanted to do that on a bigger scale, so I was looking at moving abroad, but I still needed to remain close enough that a plane flight wouldn't be too brutal if my family needed me. And so Canada was my choice. And U of C had the project that I wanted, and I knew I wanted to study MS. So that kind of led me there. What was your first lab presentation talk experience like? And how do you overcome the nerves that comes as a student presenting to more experienced lab members? I think we all can answer this. I want to start. Scary, awful. I talk real fast because I'm from California, and I am very consciously right now slowing down. So even if I seem like I'm talking quickly, I can talk faster. And I don't think I breathed for the entirety of my lab presentation. I don't think my peers understood me very well. And in terms, so everyone's first is usually awful. But you get better, you get more practice. The more you push yourself, the better you will get. How do you overcome the nerves that come as a student presenting to more experienced lab members? I think for me, that's a combo of fake it till you make it. And at a certain point, you know that you know some things and other people know more, but that's okay. You still have things to contribute. Who else wants to take that? Does anyone else want to comment on your first presentation?
So my presentation, it's terrifying. And I think if you're not terrified, you're doing something wrong. But then the nerves will kind of come with time. Just more experience, you'll get better at it. It won't be so terrifying. I know the first one I did, I had keys in my pocket and I was fidgeting with them to the point where the other people noticed the sounds because I was fidgeting so much because I was that nervous. So I don't think it'll ever completely go away, but it will get better. And your first talk will be probably bad, but it'll be better, definitely.
Okay. So Hedvig, you talked about this a bit in general, but how do you take care of your mental health when things get rough? Does anyone in particular want to take this one? I can also talk about it too. So for me personally, I have a cat. She's lovely. She's adorable. She's sleeping back there somewhere. She also hit the wall, but I don't know if anyone heard that. And so when things get tough, I will talk to my cat because she can't talk back. So that's what I do. Anyone else?
Yeah. When I first moved here, I met a lot of friends in my program and in my classes and stuff like that. And it was a really cool experience being able to share all of the struggles of grad school and your classes and your project not working out and stuff like that with people who were going through the exact same thing at the exact same time, because we would all just talk about all the things that were going wrong. And when things go right, it's nice to talk about those things too. But yeah, having those people that are in the same experiences as you, and that work goes for people in your lab too. If you have older students in your lab you can connect with that way, I think that's a really important thing as well, to know that you're not by yourself. Everyone's going through it.
And just to add on to that, you can also definitely talk about this with your supervisor. They're not there to grind every last ounce of work out of you. They're not going to destroy your life just to get a paper. And if you tell them that you're struggling, it's very likely that they'll offer some support. They'll help you get a reduced workload so you can take care of yourself, or just give you some time off. I know one of my friends at the U of A, she took an entire year off because her project wasn't going well, she wasn't doing well, so she took a year off, kind of reconsolidated what she was trying to do, and then came back, and now she's, I think, about to finish her PhD. So just talk with your supervisor.
Yep, that's a very solid piece of advice. So how do you keep afloat with your finances? Are your stipends keeping you alive? That's a great question. So for me, I'm an international student, which means I pay international tuition, which is about double a Canadian citizen's tuition. And so I owe my government money now. I take out student loans, and that helps. I take out about $10,000 a year. While I'm still paying like the max fees. Once I pass candidacy, my fees go down significantly and I won't need to take out that much. But that's what keeps me alive. If you don't eat meat, that's cheaper. Anyone else that's not broad?
I guess, yeah, I don't know. I guess my stipends are keeping me alive. They do a good job of kind of giving you, like, I guess, the amount that you need to survive, and not much more than that. But if you save and kind of spend well, then it's not impossible to kind of live a normal life and you know, stay alive. But yeah.
There's also from your university, I don't know if U of A does this, but I assume they do, U of C does it, where you can get emergency bursaries. If you have something significant going on, you can apply to the university to get a little bit more money. Does anyone else have any other questions? Any last minute burning things?
Okay, thank you everybody. Next week we will have the summer student presentations, same time, same day. And we hope to see you guys all there and supporting our summer students who have worked hard on their, however they were doing their projects this year with COVID. But it was very nice to see everybody, and we'll see you all soon.